Hello! Welcome. Welcome. Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday afternoon. It's a time zone for you.
My parents said, "You can come to the wedding, but don't speak." They let my brother give a toast instead. I sat there silent. Then he said something he shouldn't have. A secret only I knew. I stood up, pulled out my phone, and played a recording that changed everything. Half the guests walked out. So did I? I was 28 years old and sitting in the back row of my own brother's wedding like some distant relative nobody wanted to acknowledge. You know how families work, right? There's always that one kid who can't do anything right. And then there's the golden child who shits rainbows and walks on water. Well, guess which one I was. My brother Tyler had always been the star. Star quarterback in high school, full scholarship to Stanford, married his college sweetheart who looked like she stepped out of a magazine. Meanwhile, I dropped out of community college and worked at a garage fixing cars. Not exactly the success story my parents bragged about at dinner parties. The whole wedding thing started 6 months earlier when Tyler announced his engagement to Jennifer. Big family dinner, champagne flowing. Everyone acting like he'd just discovered the cure for cancer. My parents immediately started planning this massive celebration, talking about guest lists and venues, and how this would be the social event of the year in our small town. Then came the conversation I'll never forget. We were all sitting around the dining room table, and my mother casually mentioned that maybe it would be best if I kept a low profile at the wedding. You know, just attend but not really participate. No speech during the reception, no walking down the aisle as a groomsman. Just show up and blend into the background. Tyler didn't even look up from his phone when she said it. Just nodded along like they were discussing the weather. My father chimed in about how they wanted to keep things elegant and sophisticated, and how sometimes family dynamics could complicate things. Translation: we're embarrassed by you, so please just sit there and shut up. But here's the thing about being the family disappointment for 3 decades. You develop a thick skin, sure, but you also develop really good hearing. You learn to listen when people think you're not paying attention. You become invisible in plain sight, and that's when you hear the most interesting stuff. Over the next few months, I heard plenty. Late-night phone calls when Tyler thought nobody was around. Hushed conversations between my parents about finances and reputations and keeping up appearances. Little comments from Jennifer about how she didn't really understand why Tyler's family was so concerned about money when they seemed to live so comfortably. The most interesting conversation happened about 2 months before the wedding. I was working late in the garage, and Tyler showed up around midnight looking like he'd seen a ghost. He started talking about how he was having second thoughts, how maybe he wasn't ready for marriage, how there were things Jennifer didn't know about him that might change everything. I figured it was just cold feet, but then he said something that made my blood run cold. He mentioned a name I recognized from high school, a girl who'd left town suddenly during our senior year. He talked about mistakes and consequences and how some secrets were better left buried. Then he noticed I was listening and clammed up real quick. That's when I started paying closer attention. Started asking around town, making some phone calls, doing a little digging. What I found out over the next few weeks would have made a private investigator proud. It was also the kind of information that could destroy a person's life if it ever came out. See, Tyler had this whole image built up. The perfect son, the successful businessman, the loving fiancé. But images are funny things. They're only as strong as the secrets holding them up, and Tyler had some doozies. Financial irregularities at his company that he'd been covering up for years. A pattern of behavior with women that would make your skin crawl. And that girl from high school, well, let's just say her sudden departure wasn't as voluntary as everyone thought. The deeper I dug, the sicker I felt. Not because I was learning terrible things about my brother, though that was bad enough, but because I realized that everyone in the family knew something was off, and they'd all decided to just look the other way. As long as Tyler kept bringing home the wins and keeping up appearances, nobody wanted to ask too many questions. By the time the wedding rolled around, I had enough information to end Tyler's career, his marriage, and probably his freedom. I documented everything, made copies, even recorded some conversations when the opportunity presented itself. Part of me felt like a complete bastard for going behind his back like that. But the bigger part of me was tired of being treated like garbage while watching him get away with things that would have landed me in jail. The morning of the wedding, my mother actually asked me if I'd considered not coming at all. Said something about how it might be easier for everyone if I just sent my regrets. But I'd already made up my mind. I was going to be there, sitting in that back row, watching my golden boy brother promise to love and honor a woman who had no idea what kind of man she was marrying. I wore my one good suit and showed up early, finding a seat where I could see everything but hopefully be forgotten by most of the guests. The church was packed with Tyler's college friends, Jennifer's sorority sisters, business associates, and half the town elite. Everyone dressed to the nines, cameras flashing, the whole production. As I sat there watching the pre-ceremony chaos, I kept thinking about how weddings are supposed to be about truth and honesty and starting fresh. About promising to be your authentic self with another person for the rest of your life. The irony wasn't lost on me that this particular wedding was built on the exact opposite foundation. Tyler looked nervous when he took his place at the altar, which surprised me. Usually he was Mr. Confidence in situations like this. But I could see him fidgeting with his cufflinks and glancing around the church like he was expecting something bad to happen. Maybe his conscience was finally starting to catch up with him. Jennifer looked absolutely radiant walking down the aisle, completely oblivious to the bomb that was about to go off in her perfect little world. Her parents were beaming with pride, probably thinking they'd won the son-in-law lottery. If they only knew what I knew, they'd have grabbed her and run for the hills. The ceremony itself was pretty standard, all the usual promises about sickness and health and better or worse. I kept waiting for the minister to get to the part about speaking now or forever holding your peace, wondering if I'd have the guts to actually say something. But when the moment came, I just sat there like everyone expected me to. The reception was held at the country club, because of course it was. 300 guests, open bar, live band, the works. My parents had spared no expense making sure this looked like the wedding of the century. I found myself at a table in the back with some distant cousins and family friends who probably couldn't pick me out of a lineup. Dinner was served, champagne was flowing, and everyone was having a grand time celebrating the happy couple. I'll admit, despite everything I knew, there was part of me that wanted to just enjoy the evening and forget about all the dark stuff lurking beneath the surface. Family is family, right? Maybe some secrets are better left alone. Then came time for the speeches. My father went first, giving this touching tribute to Tyler about how proud he was to have such an accomplished son, how Tyler had always been the kind of person who made the right choices and took responsibility for his actions. I nearly choked on my wine listening to that load of garbage. Jennifer's dad spoke next, welcoming Tyler into their family and talking about what a good man he was, how lucky Jennifer was to have found someone so honest and trustworthy. The poor guy had no idea he was basically handing his daughter over to a predator. A few college friends shared some funny stories about Tyler's fraternity days, keeping things light and appropriate for mixed company. There were a lot of laughs and raised glasses, everyone having a great time. Then Tyler stood up to give his own speech, thanking everyone for coming and talking about how much Jennifer meant to him. Standard groom stuff, nothing too surprising. But then he started getting into this whole thing about second chances and redemption, about how meeting Jennifer had made him want to be a better man. He talked about leaving the past behind and focusing on building a future together, about how everyone makes mistakes when they're young, but what matters is growing from those experiences and becoming the person you're meant to be. Real heartfelt stuff that had half the women in the room tearing up. The thing is, I knew what mistakes he was talking about, and they weren't the kind of youthful indiscretions you just grow out of. They were the kind of mistakes that destroy lives and leave permanent damage. But there he was, spinning it all into this beautiful redemption narrative that made him look even more heroic. When Tyler finished, the whole room erupted in applause. People were wiping their eyes and raising their glasses, completely bought into his performance. My parents looked like they might burst with pride, and Jennifer was gazing at her new husband like he'd just recited poetry. Then Tyler called for his brother to say a few words. Wait, what? I looked around confused, thinking maybe there was another brother I'd forgotten about. But no. Tyler was looking right at me with this weird smile on his face. The whole room turned to stare at me sitting there in the back like a deer in headlights. My mother's face went white. My father looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. This definitely wasn't part of the plan we discussed. But Tyler kept gesturing for me to come up to the microphone, and the crowd started that awkward scattered applause you get when nobody knows what's happening. I should have just shaken my head and stayed put. Should have let the moment pass and avoided the whole disaster that was about to unfold. But something about Tyler's expression bothered me. He looked too confident, too pleased with himself, like he was setting up some kind of joke where I was the punchline. So I got up and walked to the front of the room, taking the microphone from Tyler with hands that were shaking just a little bit. 300 people staring at me, waiting to see what the family disappointment had to say about his golden boy brother. I started simple, thanking everyone for including me in the celebration and saying how happy I was for Tyler and Jennifer. Standard stuff, nothing controversial. But then Tyler leaned over and whispered something in my ear that changed everything. He said he knew I'd been asking questions around town, digging into things that weren't my business. Said he'd heard I'd been talking to people about old stories that should stay buried. Then he smiled that same confident smile and told me to keep my speech short and sweet, because nobody wanted to hear what the family screw-up had to say anyway. That's when something snapped inside me. All those years of being dismissed and ignored and treated like I didn't matter. All those times Tyler had gotten away with things that would have destroyed anyone else. All the secrets and lies and cover-ups that our whole family had participated in just to protect his precious reputation. I looked out at that room full of people who thought they knew Tyler, who'd bought into his carefully constructed image, and I realized I had a choice to make. I could give the short, sweet speech he expected and let him continue living his lie. Or I could tell the truth and watch his whole world burn. But here's what Tyler didn't know. He wasn't the only one who'd been listening to conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. While he was making his little threats, I was remembering a phone call I'd overheard just 2 weeks earlier. A call where Tyler had bragged to someone about how he had me right where he wanted me, how he'd make sure I stayed quiet about his past by humiliating me at his own wedding. He'd planned this whole thing. The surprise invitation to speak wasn't spontaneous, it was calculated. He wanted to put me on the spot, make me look foolish in front of everyone, and send a message that he was still in control. It was supposed to be his final victory over the brother who'd never measured up. That's when I realized I wasn't just carrying around information about Tyler's crimes. I was carrying around a recording of him admitting to them. See, I'd gotten into the habit of recording conversations on my phone, partly for my own protection and partly because I'd learned not to trust my family's version of events. 3 days earlier, Tyler had cornered me at the garage and made some very specific threats about what would happen if I caused any trouble at his wedding. Threats that implicated him in things that went way beyond just being a lousy person. He'd basically confessed to covering up a hit-and-run accident from 10 years ago, mentioned bribing a judge to make some charges disappear, and admitted to using his company's accounts to pay hush money to women he'd assaulted. All of it captured in crystal-clear digital audio on my phone. Standing there at that microphone, looking out at Jennifer's trusting face and her parents' proud smiles, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. The room got quiet when they saw me fumbling with my phone instead of talking. People probably thought I was nervous and checking my notes or something. Tyler's smile faltered just a bit, like he was starting to realize this wasn't going according to his plan. I cleared my throat and started talking again, but this time my voice was steady and clear. I said that instead of giving a traditional speech about Tyler, I thought it would be more meaningful to let him speak for himself. Let everyone hear the real Tyler, not the version we all pretend to see at events like this. Jennifer looked confused. My parents looked terrified. Tyler's face had gone from confident to concerned in about 2 seconds flat. He started to step toward me, probably planning to grab the microphone, but I'd already hit play on the recording. Tyler's voice filled the room through the sound system, clear as day. At first it just sounded like a normal conversation, and people weren't sure what they were listening to. But then he started talking about the Martinez girl from high school, and how her family had been paid to keep quiet about what really happened that night after prom. The room got dead silent real fast. You could hear every word as Tyler described forcing himself on her, threatening her family with financial ruin if she reported it, and how easy it had been to make the whole thing disappear with the right connections and enough money. But that was just the warm-up. The recording went on for almost 8 minutes, with Tyler bragging about hit-and-run accidents he'd covered up, judges he'd bought, and a systematic pattern of assault and intimidation that went back over a decade. He'd kept detailed records of his payoffs, thinking of them as business expenses rather than blood money. The most sickening part was how casual he sounded about it all, like he was discussing the weather instead of describing how he'd destroyed multiple lives and gotten away with it because of his family's money and connections. He even laughed at one point, talking about how easy it was to manipulate people when they were desperate enough. About halfway through the recording, people started getting up from their tables. Some were heading for the exits. Others were just standing there in shock. Jennifer had gone completely white and was gripping the edge of the head table like she might faint. Her parents looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. My parents were frantically trying to signal the DJ to cut the sound system, but the equipment was right next to where I was standing, and I wasn't about to let them stop the truth from coming out. Tyler himself had frozen in place, probably realizing that his whole life was about to come crashing down around him. The recording got worse as it went on. Tyler started talking about Jennifer herself, about how gullible she was and how easy it had been to convince her that he was this reformed bad boy who'd found true love. He described their relationship like it was just another con game, another way to improve his image and gain access to her family's social connections. He even mentioned specific instances where he'd cheated on her during their engagement, including with her own sister at the bachelorette party last month. Said it was just business, nothing personal, but that having leverage over family members was always useful for keeping people in line. By the time the recording ended, probably 2/3 of the guests had left the room. The ones who remained were either too shocked to move or too invested in the drama to walk away. Jennifer was crying, but not the happy tears you usually see at weddings. These were the tears of someone whose entire world had just been revealed as a lie. Tyler finally found his voice and started shouting at me, calling me every name in the book and threatening to have me arrested for invasion of privacy. But his threats rang pretty hollow considering what everyone had just heard him confess to on tape. Plus, I'd been careful to make sure I was legally in the clear when I made the recording. That's when the really crazy stuff started happening. Jennifer's father, who was apparently more connected than anyone had realized, pulled out his own phone and started making calls. Within minutes, people in suits were showing up at the country club, flashing badges, and asking Tyler to step outside for a conversation. Turns out Jennifer's dad had friends in the FBI who'd been investigating some financial irregularities at Tyler's company for months. They'd been looking for an excuse to bring him in for questioning, and a recording of him confessing to multiple felonies was exactly the break they'd been waiting for. My parents tried to blame me for ruining Tyler's life, but even they couldn't argue with what we'd all just heard. My mother actually slapped me across the face right there in front of everyone, screaming about how I destroyed our family's reputation and embarrassed them in front of the whole town. But here's the thing about reputations built on lies. They're not really worth protecting in the first place. And as for embarrassment, well, I figured the family had bigger problems to worry about than what the neighbors might think. Jennifer's mother was trying to comfort her daughter while simultaneously coordinating with the catering staff to shut down the reception. The band had already packed up and left. Most of the remaining guests were clustered in small groups, probably trying to process what they'd just witnessed. I should have felt victorious, right? After all those years of being treated like garbage, I'd finally exposed Tyler for what he really was. I'd protected Jennifer from marrying a monster, possibly saved other women from becoming his victims, and ensured that justice would finally be served. But mostly I just felt empty. Destroying your brother's life, even when he deserves it, isn't the triumph you think it's going to be. It's just sad and messy and leaves everyone damaged in ways that never fully heal. The FBI agents didn't arrest Tyler right there at the wedding, but they made it clear he needed to come with them for questioning. As they were leading him out, he turned to look at me one last time. Instead of anger or hatred, his expression was almost resigned, like he'd always known this day would come eventually. That was 3 months ago, and the fallout has been bigger than anyone could have imagined. Tyler's arrest made national news because of the scope of his crimes and the high-profile nature of his victims. Turns out the Martinez girl wasn't his only victim. There were at least 12 other women who came forward once the story broke, spanning nearly 15 years of systematic abuse. The hit-and-run accident I'd heard him reference? That killed a 70-year-old grandmother who'd been walking her dog. Tyler had been driving drunk after a company party, hit her in a crosswalk, and kept going. The family had been fighting for justice for 10 years, never knowing that the evidence had been buried by corrupt officials Tyler had bought off. His company collapsed within a week of his arrest. Federal investigators found evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering going back to when Tyler first started working there. He'd been using company funds to pay bribes and hush money, then covering his tracks with fake invoices and shell corporations. The whole thing was incredibly sophisticated. Tyler might have been a monster, but he was also genuinely brilliant at financial crime. Jennifer filed for an annulment immediately, of course, but the legal complications have been nightmarish because they'd technically been married for about 40 minutes before everything went sideways. Her family's lawyers are working overtime to protect her from any potential criminal liability, since she'd unknowingly benefited from Tyler's illegal activities. The most shocking development came about 6 weeks after the wedding, when Jennifer's sister Rachel came forward with her own story. Turns out Tyler's confession about sleeping with her at the bachelorette party was just the tip of the iceberg. He'd been systematically manipulating and assaulting her for over 2 years, using a combination of drugs, threats, and financial leverage to keep her quiet. Rachel had been planning to kill herself rather than continue living with what Tyler was doing to her. The recording at the wedding literally saved her life by giving her the courage to finally speak up. She's in therapy now and working with prosecutors to build an even stronger case against Tyler. My parents initially tried to stand by Tyler, hiring expensive lawyers and claiming he was being railroaded by vindictive prosecutors and opportunistic victims. But as more evidence came out, even they couldn't maintain their denial. My father actually had a heart attack when he learned about the extent of Tyler's crimes, not from guilt or shame, but from the stress of realizing their family's finances were completely tied up in Tyler's illegal activities. See, Tyler had been supporting our parents for years, paying their mortgage and credit card bills and funding their comfortable lifestyle. Money they thought came from his successful business career had actually been stolen from his company and extorted from his victims. When the assets got frozen during the investigation, my parents lost everything almost overnight. They're living in a one-bedroom apartment now, both working retail jobs to make ends meet. My mother still won't speak to me, blaming me for destroying Tyler's life and ruining theirs in the process. My father has been a little more understanding, admitting that Tyler needed to face consequences for his actions, but he still thinks I should have handled things differently. The really twisted part is that I've become something of a local hero to some people. The victims' families see me as the person who finally brought Tyler to justice after years of being ignored by the system. There's even been talk about a book deal and maybe a documentary about the whole situation. But I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of his own family and is still trying to figure out what to do with the radioactive fallout. Yes, Tyler was a monster who needed to be stopped. Yes, his victims deserve justice. But the collateral damage has been devastating for everyone involved. Jennifer has moved back in with her parents and is seeing a therapist 3 times a week. She's also become an advocate for other women who've been manipulated by predators, turning her trauma into something that might help prevent other people from going through what she experienced. She actually called me a few weeks ago to thank me, which was one of the most emotionally complicated conversations of my life. The FBI investigation is still ongoing, but Tyler has already pleaded guilty to multiple felonies to avoid the death penalty for the hit-and-run case. He's looking at somewhere between 40 and 60 years in prison, which at his age basically means he'll die behind bars. His lawyer tried to negotiate some kind of deal where he'd provide information about other corrupt officials in exchange for a reduced sentence, but apparently Tyler doesn't have anything valuable enough to trade. I've been called as a witness in several of the criminal cases, which has meant reliving that whole nightmare over and over again in courtrooms and depositions. The defense attorneys have tried to paint me as a jealous brother who fabricated evidence to destroy Tyler's life, but the physical evidence backs up everything on the recording. The most unexpected consequence has been the impact on my own life. I'm still working at the garage, but now I'm actually the owner after the previous owner decided to retire and sell it to me. Turns out having your story plastered all over the news is pretty good for business when you're the guy who stood up to corruption and fought for justice. I've also started dating someone for the first time in years. Her name is Anna, and she's a social worker who specializes in helping trauma victims. We met at a victims' rights conference where I was speaking about the importance of believing survivors and holding powerful people accountable for their actions. Anna knows everything about what happened with Tyler, and she's helped me work through a lot of the guilt and confusion I've been carrying around. She says what I did was brave, even if it didn't feel that way at the time. She also says that sometimes doing the right thing requires destroying the wrong thing, even when that wrong thing is your own family. The hardest part has been accepting that my relationship with my parents may never recover. They raised Tyler and me very differently, and they're having to confront some uncomfortable truths about their own role in creating the monster he became. My mother's refusal to acknowledge any responsibility has made reconciliation almost impossible. But I've also discovered that I have other family members who've been quietly dealing with their own Tyler-related trauma for years. Cousins who'd been assaulted at family gatherings, family friends who'd been threatened or intimidated, even some of my parents' neighbors who'd suspected something wasn't right but felt powerless to speak up. It turns out Tyler's behavior was an open secret in a lot of circles, but his money and connections had kept him insulated from consequences. By finally breaking that protection, I'd given a lot of other people permission to tell their own stories and seek their own justice. The legal cases are still working their way through the system, but Tyler's conviction is essentially guaranteed at this point. The evidence is overwhelming. He's already confessed to most of it, and his own arrogance is documented in multiple recordings and written communications. As for me, I'm still trying to figure out what comes next. I've got a business to run, a relationship to nurture, and a family legacy to somehow rebuild from the ground up. Some days are better than others, but I sleep well at night knowing that Tyler can't hurt anyone else. The garage has become an unofficial safe space for people dealing with trauma and seeking support. I've got victim advocates stopping by regularly, and I've started hosting a monthly support group for families dealing with the aftermath of abuse. It's not the life I ever imagined for myself, but it feels meaningful in ways that my old existence never did. 3 months later, I'm still processing everything that happened. Some people say I'm a hero for exposing Tyler and protecting his future victims. Others say I'm a traitor who destroyed his own family for personal revenge. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in between. What I know for sure is that secrets have power, and that power can be used to hurt people or to protect them. For too long, our family's secrets had been used as weapons against the innocent. By bringing them into the light, I'd at least given people a chance to fight back. Tyler is in prison. Jennifer is rebuilding her life. Rachel is getting the help she needs, and justice is being served for victims who thought they'd never see it. The cost has been enormous for everyone involved, but the alternative would have been letting Tyler continue destroying lives while hiding behind his family's protection. I still have the original recording saved in multiple locations, along with all the other evidence I gathered during my investigation. Sometimes I listen to it late at night, trying to understand how my brother became the monster he turned into. But mostly I try to focus on the future and the possibility that something good might come from all this destruction. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.